Welcome, welcome. I'm John. We're in my kitchen, but today we're going to Italy. So, we are going to do this in two parts. First, we are going to talk about the tomato. We're going to make some tomato sauce. Then we're going to talk about the three principal red wines that we will encounter in Italy. Maybe start your collection a little bit, start some traveling around, but let's start with tomatoes. Now, there is very few things that bring to mind more of Italy than the tomato. So the tomato is like the grape. There are millions of different ones. So right here on this little table, I have a sun-dried tomato. The sun-dried tomato is left out in the sun, and if you've ever had one, you'll know that the flavors begin to concentrate. This right here is what we call a beefsteak tomato, or a slicing tomato in the United States. And this is a firmer tomato. And the reason why it is great for putting with a steak is because the texture itself of the tomato is more firm. It also has less juice, so when you're picking it up with a fork, using it in a salad, it's a little bit better for that. Our next type of tomato that we're going to talk about is what we call the vine tomato. And the vine tomato is a lot more tender, and it has a lot more juice in it. And because of that, it's a little bit better for making sauces, and also if you want a softer texture and a more flavorful tomato experience, we have this type. And then finally, we have the Roma tomato, which you typically would use in order to make sauce. This is a different looking tomato on the inside. So if you see it, it's got this spherical result as opposed to here when we're looking at the beefsteak tomato, or if we're looking, for example, at the vine ripened tomato. These are what you would use to make sauce generally, but again, a little different flavor profile. And then these little buggers are called cherry tomatoes. And these cherry tomatoes have a very, very distinct, strong flavor that you could use to top a salad. So why are we talking so much about tomatoes on a channel about grapes, about wine? Because this is exactly the same thing that you would find if we started pulling out grapes that make up for the different varietals. So if it's a Pinot Noir, it might have a thinner skin. Cabernet Sauvignon, a darkness to the grape and also a firmness to the skin, the amount of juice that's produced, the concentration, and we'll get back to this idea of the sun-dried tomato in a minute. Let's go make some sauce. So, instead of using the tomatoes that we have here, what we are going to do is we are going to use a can of tomatoes. There's only a couple things that we'll need to prep. So as we move these out of the way, the things that we will need to prep are the garlic. I'm gonna show you a little trick with that. And then the spices. So what I have right here is a Italian blend. So these are actually pre-packaged but fresh. In this case, basil, arugula, and parsley. And what I can do with that is simply chop it up and throw it in. And it saves on waste when I'm making so little. Canned tomatoes. This is the most important thing. What you want to do is you want to get the expensive Italian canned tomatoes. It will make all the difference, I promise you, in the world. And so these will come in a can. The other choice is to use Roma tomatoes, and then you just cook them first yourself in order to make it into this kind of consistency. But what we're going to do is we are just going to dump these in. So this I am putting on a medium-low setting, and I'm putting it in the pot, and I'm going to start that process. This is a long cooking sauce, so this will take a couple hours on the stove. And so I'm gonna add a little bit of olive oil. Always a good idea to have great olive oil for your sauce. and then a little bit of this butter. So for this amount, the small can amount, I'm just using a couple tablespoons of butter, and I am leaving that in there. All right, so let's talk about how to do garlic, like what are some good tricks for doing garlic. So first thing is that I am going to pop off a couple cloves here so that we can talk a little bit about the process of getting the skin off it and then grating it. And so here I've got a couple of them. You will see here, I pulled the skin off, it came off pretty easily. Let's pretend it doesn't come off as easily. You can use a paring knife if you would like. Two choices. One is to chop the garlic. The other is to use a microplane. And so I'm going to use a microplane in order to put this garlic into my sauce. So I'm gonna use just a couple cloves of garlic, more or less depending on your personal taste, on your family's personal taste. The same is true of onions. So if your family really likes onions, then what you will do is you will have onions that soak in this, and then you actually pull them out once the onion taste is in it. So you're not gonna leave the onions in the sauce. In my family, we tend to use the onion powder. Whatever works for you is what works for you, but that is a personal decision. So this microplaner is very, very useful for this. It's also useful for cheese. Remember to clean it thoroughly because, of course, garlic is strong. So I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna just dice it up a little bit. Always better to use fresh herbs, but you know what? It's a little bit like the can of tomatoes. Sometimes just the dried ones work fine. I tend to use a little bit more when they're fresh. And the reason for that is because the flavors are actually not as concentrated as in the dried, right? So it's like the tomato, it'll shrivel up once you dry all these things. And so when they are fresh like this, you're actually just gonna use a little bit more. Then the salt and the sugar. So a rule of thumb, I use 1 tablespoon of salt, and you will be dealing with this to your own taste. This is a problem of being in Florida because everything gets a little bit wet, so it's kind of a little bit hard to use. And then I use about a 1/2 tablespoon of sugar. The sugar actually becomes really important. You don't think about it as a very important ingredient, but it turns out that it pulls that tartness off of the sauce. So what we are going to do is we are going to start this cooking. It is cooking on a low temperature. We'll kind of check in with it as we go, but you're gonna want it for a couple hours. And then you know what the worst part is? I'm gonna make you stick it in the fridge overnight. So this is something that'll last for a while once you make it, but you gotta plan ahead a little bit. All right, as our first check-in, this is about 30 minutes. Okay, we are about an hour in. We are going to start cooking this now. We're gonna lower the temperature so there's no bubbles, no boiling. It's just simmering. And we're gonna leave the cap off for the rest of the cook time in order to let it thicken. So this is a couple hours. This is the sauce consistency you're looking for, right? You don't want too watery. So maybe give it 15, 30 more minutes. So it's 2 hours, 30 minutes. And from there, we're going to cool it. All right, we're gonna put this in here so that we can refrigerate it. Conceptually, what we are trying to do is allow the flavors to have time to integrate. So, you know, when you first start cooking it, you're gonna melt the flavors together, but they're not truly together. And so refrigeration actually helps. So with a lot of sauces, where it's all about letting it soak together, but especially true of tomato sauce. And that is going to be our tomato sauce, which gives us the basis for our red wine from Italy. Let's go over to the bar and check out a few wines. So when it comes to Italian food, we know the tomato's the king. That brings us to these red wines. Now each of these is very collectible, they're accessible, meaning they're not terribly expensive, and they all go really well with tomato sauce. So that's your pastas and your pizzas and everything. I'll give you a little bit of hints with each of them, but what is interesting about it is what you're doing is matching acid, right? So your acid level is very high in tomatoes. It is also higher in these wines as well in different ways. So the first that we're all pretty familiar with is Chianti. Chianti is a region, right? The type of grape is Sangiovese. And this is kind of the backbone of the famous wines of Tuscany. This is the most common wine that you'll see at your pizzeria or your Italian restaurant on there. And that's true if you're drinking a Classico like this, or Brunello di Montalcino, which you would save in your cellar. And it works great with tomatoes. And the reason is because of its acidity. So this matches the acidity perfectly, but it also balances out the herbs that we typically see in Italian food. It has a medium body, it's not too strong as far as the feel on your mouth, and that has kind of like a little earthy undertone that goes really well with pasta, makes you feel like you're in Europe, and then it just kind of clears out the palate. And so this is the wine that you will see in the restaurant that they're selling you by the carafe for your meatballs, your spaghetti meatballs, your pizza, margarita, kind of all those basic ones. So this Sangiovese is something that is going to be your most typical red wine. Moving on, north, the Piedmont region of Italy, we have Nebbiolo, which is the grape of Barolo and Barbaresco. So this right here is a Barolo. These are powerful, complex wines, and they're good for like richer tomato dishes. And they are great for keeping in the cellar. So there's some key characteristics of these, and the thing that makes them age so well are the tannins. They're powerful. The smell, which is so much fun, is it's a rose smell. And then besides all that, it has this kind of complex sour cherry taste that starts mellowing over time. This is great once you have some braised meat ragu, wild mushroom pasta, you have like a rich meat-based lasagna. This is a great wine and it keeps forever, and so it's a great choice. Most interesting one, not my personal favorite, but one that you definitely need to know about, and this is Amarone. And so it's made through a process that is called a passamento. And what this is really kind of a unique process that uses grapes, primarily Corvina, although there's a couple other grapes, Rodolina and Molinara, that are harvested, but then they're put on a straw mat. And it is a special straw mat that goes into a drying room that's called a frittoio. And for about 100 days, it is slowly dehydrating the grape, just like a sun-dried tomato. And what happens is that it reduces it by about 30 to 40%. So this is an old Roman process. It goes back forever. It just concentrates everything. So it concentrates your sugars and your flavors and your aroma, just like that sun-dried tomato we looked at earlier. Few things are come as a result. One is that you are generally going to have a higher level of alcohol. So instead of 12, 13, 14%, you're gonna have 15, 16% with your Amarone. You're gonna have complexity, you're gonna have these spice elements, and then there's gonna be the sweetness, and then comes the acidity. So it's kind of a different flavor profile, and it's intense. And so it is something to try if you haven't, but it is just absolutely perfect with certain dishes like ossobuco or like a rich vegetable tomato stew. It also goes great with like aged cheeses. And so this is a fantastic, fantastic wine that you should have in your cellar, and people who like it love it. So, depending on what you're looking for, the accessible kind of everywhere you could find it, Sangiovese, or the power of a Barolo, Nebbiolo, or if you just want this concentration, the sweetness that comes with the Amarone, they all work with tomato-based dishes. And so enjoy like I'm gonna enjoy it with that tomato sauce, but I'm gonna wait till tomorrow after it comes out of the fridge. And then we'll pour one of these and have a nice pasta. You could even put it on toast, on bread, on all sorts of things, and just enjoy everything that Italy has to offer.